The Scholar and the Boatman from the Masnavi of Rumi. Welcome to Persian Stories. In this episode, we turn to one of the greatest spiritual and philosophical voices in world literature, Jalaluddin Muhammad Balkhi, known around the world simply as Rumi. Rumi was a poet, thinker, and mystic whose words crossed borders of language, religion, and culture. Today, his poetry is read and loved worldwide, especially in Europe and North America, inspiring millions of readers and listeners. Rumi's masterpiece, the Masnavi, is a vast collection of stories and parables filled with moral and spiritual insight. Again and again, Rumi reminds us that knowledge is not the same as wisdom. The story you are about to hear is a free and modern retelling of the famous tale The Grammarian and the Boatman from Book 1 of the Masnavi. If you would like to read the complete original version, you can refer to the classic English translation by Reynold A. Nicholson in Book 1 of the Masnavi. And now, this is the story. It was early morning. The ship slowly pulled away from the shore. The smell of fish and sea salt filled the air, and sunlight danced gently across the waves. On the deck sat a man everyone called Professor. He was famous in major colleges of his country and had been invited to lecture at a university abroad. He knew philosophy and astronomy, had taught grammar, language, and theology for many years, and spoke several languages fluently with confidence that impressed his students. A group of students gathered around him on the deck. They asked eager questions, and the professor answered loudly and rhythmically, as if speaking to the entire world. Below them, near ropes and oars, the sailors worked without rest, their hands wet with sweat, their clothes damp with seawater. The ship moved by their strength. The boatman, calm and middle-aged, with eyes shaped by years at sea, stood at the helm quietly, watching the ship, the water, and the people. To greet them politely, the boatman approached the professor and his students. He stopped, stood respectfully, and offered a simple greeting. The professor, speaking proudly about the power of knowledge, did not return the greeting. Instead, he turned suddenly toward the boatman and asked a question loudly. "Tell me, grammarian, have you ever studied grammar?" The question echoed across the deck, meant less to inquire and more to display superiority. The boatman answered honestly and without hesitation. "No," he said, "I have not studied grammar." His voice was calm, without shame or defense. The professor smiled and said loudly so all could hear, "Then half of your life has been wasted." A few students laughed, amused by his confidence. The boatman's face grew warm with embarrassment. He said nothing, lowered his head, and quietly returned to work beside the other sailors. When night arrived, the professor and his students ate, talked, and fell asleep from comfort and exhaustion. But the sea did not rest. The wind suddenly shifted. The ship began to shake. Waves rose higher and higher, and water poured in from the sides, filling the deck with fear. The sailors shouted commands. One rowed with force, one bailed water, another pulled ropes tight, each movement urgent and precise. The professor woke in terror. His students panicked and ran toward the boatman, seeking answers, seeking safety. Above the roar of wind and waves, the boatman shouted clearly, "Do you know how to swim?" The question cut through fear like a blade. The professor hesitated. His voice trembled. "No," he said quietly, "I do not know how to swim." The sea answered with silence. The boatman spoke without mockery or anger. "Then your whole life is in danger," he said calmly, "for this ship is caught in deadly whirlpools." At that very moment, a massive wave struck the ship. The professor lost his balance, fell over the railing, and vanished into the dark water. Without hesitation, the boatman leapt into the sea. Through waves and cold, he reached the professor professor and pulled him back toward the ship. Slowly, the storm weakened. The waves settled. The wind softened. Against all odds, the ship survived the night. The professor, soaked and trembling, sat beside the sailors, no longer above them, no longer admired, only human and silent. Still working, the boatman turned to the professor and students and spoke gently, not as a teacher, but as someone who had lived. "I know nothing of philosophy or grammar," he said, "but the sea taught me one truth. Until a person lets go of himself, he cannot truly survive. Knowledge that makes a person feel superior becomes heavy like stone. Stones sink. Lightness comes from humility, not from pride. Knowledge itself is not dangerous," the boatman continued, "but when someone believes knowledge alone makes him safe, that is exactly where danger begins." The students stood in silence. This lesson came not from books or formal lectures, but from compassion for others, from inner surrender, and from flowing gently with life. This story touches only one reflection of the deep mystical wisdom found in Rumi's work. Each tale opens a door inward, inviting reflection, compassion, and a gentler way of living. Thank you for listening to Persian Stories. We hope you will follow the channel and join us again for another story and another journey.